Thanks for coming. So my name is Helen. I am a product manager at VMware for the Cloud Managed Business Unit, and I'm joined by Viktor from PQR. We're here to tell you about automation, and particularly about our new cloud automation services that we've just announced a little over a month ago. So before we start, just how many of you are already using VRA in production? Anybody here? All right, a few of you. So how many of you have been evaluating VRealize Automation? Or automation in general, right? and how many of you are particularly interested in SaaS services, or at least investigating SaaS services rather than on-prem? Okay, good. A fair number of you. Great. So hopefully we'll have some good information for you and some things for you to think about. Most of what we're talking about here, the services are launched officially, as I said, but some of what we'll talk about is a little bit more general and giving you a sense of our direction. So I have to show you this slide. I think you will see this slide many times during the course of the week. So for the last year or so, you've seen VMware start to launch some cloud services that are now available as SaaS alongside our on-prem services. And the cloud automation services have just joined that family, right? And that's what we're here to talk about today. But part of what we want to especially talk about is how we have this whole ecosystem of services, and how having all of these different functions as available in part of our overall cloud services platform actually allows us to integrate them together and give you a more complete story overall. So today we'll talk a little bit about what it means to do cloud automation in general today. We'll share some stories about how automation can help you achieve greater success, and we'll tell you a little bit specifically about these new services that we've just unveiled, and we hope to show you a bit of a demo just to kind of give you an idea of what this product looks like and what it can do. So what we hear in generally is, I work for VMware, right? You all are VMware customers, and so we've been talking about private cloud for a very long time, right? And we've gotten pretty good at it, I think. We used to have all of these silos in the data center, right? You used to have all these different teams with their particular specialties, and it used to be very hard to get the networking team to talk to the storage team, and to actually be able to prevent a whole complete service to your end users, where they're just looking for infrastructure as a service. They don't really need to know about the underlying organizations that actually deliver that. I think in general, these problems have started to work themselves out, and we've got a lot of customers with a lot of success with the private cloud. What we see now is that almost every customer that we talk to has some amount of public cloud that either you're starting to think about, right, or actively using, or certainly some departments in the company are starting to use public cloud, whether you like them or not. Does this sound familiar at all? Right? So what it turns out is that the clouds are now the new silos, right? You have these teams who then decide, oh great, AWS has this great service, we're going to go start using that because IT is not providing that for us today, so but I can get that off the shelf from Amazon, or I can go to Azure or Google, right? And all of these teams are now they now have their own silos, they have their own practices, they have their own kind of homegrown solutions now. So for an IT team who's been trying to provide a cloud solution overall, right, and they feel like they've had success with giving the private cloud solution, they now have these challenges of, now there are these applications running out in the public cloud, right? You're not even sure exactly what is being deployed there, right? You certainly don't know whether they're following any kind of best practices as far as security. You don't know, there could be actually production applications that depend on something running in the public cloud, and something can happen which the IT team may be ultimately responsible for, but it's actually, they don't have good visibility to that. It's hard for them to understand how to optimize performance or cost or budget and these kinds of things. So there's a whole new set of solutions, or a whole new set of problems now, where we'd like to provide a multi-cloud solution that actually addresses some of these challenges. But this is the perspective that we see from VMware. But rather than hear me tell you what the reality out there is, I'd like to invite Viktor to come share some of his experiences, tell you a little bit from his point of view.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Viktor van Berg from the Netherlands. I work as a technology officer at PQR. In my daily job, my focus is the SDDC, software-defined data center, and more specifically, cloud management platforms using the VRealize technology from VMware. PQR is a system integrator from the Netherlands. We have a rather broad portfolio. One of our strategic partners is VMware, and we really love VMware. We design, we implement solutions both for the software-defined data center as well for the end-user computing part. Okay, what I will do or talk about in the upcoming 50 minutes is have a look at the software-defined data center and have a look at what we currently do with automation, what are the outcomes we can achieve there, but also what are some challenges you might run into. Then I will give it back to Helen that will continue to talk about the SaaS-based cloud automation services. So if we talk about the software-defined data center with our customers, most of the time I use this picture. This really explains the software-defined data center. Several layers are here in this picture, in this architecture. Let's start at the bottom. We have the software-defined infrastructure, of course, we all know. Software-defined compute, which is just traditional virtualization with vSphere on the left. Then we have software-defined storage. We do that with VMware vSAN. Networking and security, VMware NSX is there. And at the right, backup. I must say, most of the time we do the backup solution with a third-party solution. So this software-defined infrastructure layer contains the different infrastructure components you need, but they're all, of course, software-defined. So we can consume them from this infrastructure layer through a GUI, just using vCenter Server or the NSX Manager, but also through an API. And this API helps us if we want to automate the software-defined infrastructure. So let us move one layer up. There we have the cloud management control plane. And in the cloud management control plane, we have our management tooling, for example, the vCenter Server and NSX, but we also use or leverage VRealize components. So VRealize Automation is there, VRealize Operations Manager, VRealize Business. Some characteristics of this cloud management control plane is that we want to do proactive operations management there, using VRealize Operations. We want to do policy-based management, and policy-based management is very specific is linked to the software-defined infrastructure, because with policy-based management we can describe how our infrastructure should behave in terms of performance and availability. And after we have defined those policies, we can link it to virtual machines and applications that are deployed. So for example, you have a vSAN storage policy, which describes which performance is required, which availability is required. Same counts for NSX. With NSX, you can do microsegmentation, and you will also describe this microsegmentation in policies. So important part of how you manage a software-defined data center, policy-based management. And of course, workflows. With workflows, we can automate the software-defined data center, and we are focused on automating standard administration tasks. For example, virtual machine deployment, application deployment, etc., but also maybe infrastructure configuration, that's also possible. So we have the control plane. On top of that, we have a self-service portal. With VRealize Automation, in combination with VRealize Orchestrator and also VRealize Business, you can provide a self-service portal to your users, and you can provide IT services. IT services like virtual machines in combination with applications, or other services, whatever you like. So these are the layers in the software-defined data center, and our goal is to move up in this architecture. The main focus should not be the software-defined infrastructure, although that will remain important, of course, but you want to focus on cloud management, on policy-based management. That is the way you want to look at the software-defined data center. Okay, what are our customers, so PQR's customers, doing with automation in the software-defined data center? Well, PQR customers are working with self-service, are working with automation across the different verticals, such as the commercial market. We have customers in the central, regional, and local government, education, healthcare, research, that are all organizations that use the software-defined data center and are working on automation. So what are typical use cases? I already mentioned them. Most important use case is probably virtual machine lifecycle management. Most of the time it starts with automating virtual machine deployment. Sometimes combined with application lifecycle management, so automated deployment of applications. We can do infrastructure configuration, we can automate that as well. For example, create a new storage volume or create a new physical VLAN. You can do that in an automated way. And at the right, anything as a service. VRealize Automation is very powerful because everything that has an API that can be automated. Earlier this year, I participated in a hackathon during the Dutch VMware user group meeting, and we actually linked a Lego Mindstorms robot to VRealize Automation, and was able to let that robot do certain tasks using the self-service portal of VRealize Automation. You can just do that, no problem. So what are the scenarios? We see shared service centers using automation, so offering IT services to the customers of a shared service center. Can be an enterprise data center. Sometimes the scenario is more focused on application transformation, and also the development scenario where we have developers and those developers need virtual machines or a development environment. This can also be achieved using the VRealize solutions. Size of environments varies from pretty small, maybe just 150 VMs, or up till 5,000 plus VMs. Smaller environments with only 150 VMs, it's most of the time more a development scenario. And the bigger scenarios can be a shared service center, for example. Okay, what are the outcomes that we get from automating self-service? Of course, we can deliver on-demand IT services, applications, and/or virtual machines. And that will improve your agility. Another important outcome is that we have a faster automated deployment. Sometimes when I do consultancy at a customer, deployment time of a virtual machine can be 2 weeks or even longer. Using automation, you can bring this back to less than 1 hour. We have a more standardized environment. VRealize Automation is working with blueprints, and these blueprints will help you to define standard building blocks, and those building blocks can be published in the self-service portal. We have a more consistent deployment, of course, because deployment is automated, so you will also reduce human errors, and we can improve security. We can improve security through NSX. You can deploy NSX components through the VRealize Automation self-service portal. You can link microsegmentation policies to a virtual machine, for example. And the improved security is also a result of the reduction of human errors, because you have less risk there. Other interesting outcome that automation will bring you is that you get more insight on who uses what and why people are using that. And that in combination with using leases will also reduce your virtual machine sprawl. So these are some of the outcomes we see when we talk about automation in the software-defined data center. You also might run into some challenges. So let's have a look at that as well. VRealize Automation provides a very solid platform. Most of the use cases, it's pretty focused on vSphere, automating vSphere in combination with NSX. VRealize Automation also supports Azure and AWS, but if you look at the product, I think the main focus is vSphere. The most features are linked to automating vSphere, the vSphere platform. It is an on-premises solution. You have to install the VRealize Automation and orchestration orchestrator in your data center, and that can be challenging. You have to deal with different components, for example, a virtual VRealize Automation appliance, some Windows components as well. So yeah, that can be a little tough if you do it for the first time. I have to be honest, VMware also provides the VRealize Suite Lifecycle Manager, and that is a pretty powerful tool, because with the VRealize Suite Lifecycle Manager you can automate the deployment of the VRealize platform, and that will certainly help you. So that's worth a look. Because it is an on-premises product, updates are there about 1 or 2 updates a year. Then I mean version updates. Sometimes there are also patches, but of course this will cost you time, and you have to work on the updates for this product. Then we have the Converge Blueprint Designer in VRealize Automation. The Converge Blueprint Designer is a Visio-like interactive canvas you use to design your virtual machines, design your applications. It's pretty powerful, but currently it doesn't have a versioning system in it. So if your blueprints change pretty often and you want to move back and forth, it's not really possible right now. Same counts for this one. Once a blueprint is deployed, updating the blueprint is most of the time out of scope of VRA. That is not always a problem, but because we see a lot of customers using VRA in combination with, for example, Ansible or Puppet or Chef, and then they use that tooling to update their blueprints. But that is something that you should think about. What we also see, and Helen was already talking about this, that customers are moving to multi-cloud scenarios. And although VRealize Automation supports AWS and Azure, they are not really treated as equal citizens. So maybe we'll look in that in a couple of minutes. And another part, IAC, what stands for Infrastructure as Code, is getting more important, specifically in development scenario. You can do infrastructure as code with VRealize Automation, but it's a little bit hidden. You have to download what they call the cloud client, and with the cloud client you can access the infrastructure as code and manage that. We will see that in the online service, infrastructure as code has a more prominent place in the product. Okay. Let's get back to you, Helen, and let's talk about cloud automation services.
All right, thank you very much. So those experiences that Viktor just shared, I think they're fairly common, they're fairly typical. We certainly hear a lot of that in the product team, and that's what's driven a lot of the direction of the cloud automation services that we're introducing. So what are these services that we're talking about? So what we're calling our cloud automation services is actually 3 distinct services. And I'll point out just at the bottom of this diagram, almost every slide you see from VMware actually has a bunch of clouds at the bottom now, right? We've got the private cloud, which is your on-prem VMware SDDC. We have the VMware cloud on AWS, and then we have the public cloud, right? Your AWS, your Azures, your Google clouds. So we take this very seriously that we have these 3 options, and we do want them to be equal citizens, right? They're all equal size here, and that is the foundation of our new solution. On top of that, we want to put a consistent experience across whichever cloud you choose to deploy to. And we'll give you this declarative template and orchestration, which is a fancy word for the blueprinting that Viktor just described. Right? So this is where you define the workloads that you're trying to deploy, and actually, because we know how to treat all the different clouds as first-class citizens, we can actually allow you to define that in a cloud-agnostic way. So you can just define, this is your application, this is your intent, these are your requirements. And we can actually provision that to any given cloud, actually potentially make a dynamic decision at deployment time of which cloud you're going to actually deploy to. On top of that blueprinting, you can put a service catalog, right? That provides your self-service consumption experience, and also a pipeline for your DevOps delivery. So how does this map to the actual services that we provide? So Cloud Assembly is the foundational service. It provides this policy-based provisioning layer that I talked about, which is just consistent across all the clouds, and most importantly, an API, because it's all about being able to access us programmatically and to be able to provision not just through a nice UI, but actually be able to automate that provisioning from some other tool, right? So that provides that provisioning layer plus the blueprinting. Then Service Broker is that self-service consumption experience. What that provides is not just kind of the storefront where your users can come in and consume the services that you're providing, but it also provides the governance. It allows us to actually define all of the policies around how you'd like people to consume things like the leases that we discussed before. And then the pipeline, for those of you who may be familiar with VRealize CodeStream, CodeStream is the SaaS evolution of that product, so it's all about the CI/CD process. So why are we, as VMware, going towards SaaS? So just wanted to speak to it very briefly. So first of all, what Viktor mentioned, VRA as an on-prem product, it's something you have to maintain, it's something you have to manage the installation, the upgrades, and so forth. We hear from our customers all the time that they spend a certain amount of their time with just the administration and management of the platform itself. They'd like to spend less time on that, more time on delivering new services, right? So they can actually meet the demands of their end users. I also mentioned this earlier on the service ecosystem, right? We are actually bringing our services in this platform where other VMware teams within our business unit and across all of VMware are actually making our services available. And by having it all in the same system where we can have shared authentication, shared services under the covers, we can actually integrate much more tightly than we can between our on-prem products where typically we've had different solutions on different architectures that evolve completely independently, and then we try to tie them together. Here we can actually design them to work together from the ground up. And then finally, another point Viktor mentioned, that as an on-prem product, you get 1 or 2 releases a year, and then even though we release them, it may take your time and planning to decide which version I'm going to. Is there enough new functionality in this that is going to be relevant to me that I want to invest the time to plan and upgrade and test and roll this out into production? With SaaS, of course, we can actually push code and new features and new functionality into production almost continuously. We do it almost every day. And we want to actually be able to make that new functionality available, put it in your hands so that you can actually try to use it and give us the feedback of, can you solve real problems with it, right? Are we going in the right direction? If we hear from you that, okay, this is great, but we need to go further, then we know the direction we're going in. And if you're telling us that was, not very interesting, or you feel like our priorities are, not quite aligned with what you need, it helps us adjust our roadmap as well. So that's very important for us as we build in the next generation of automation. We've taken a lot of learnings from our years of delivering VRealize Automation already, but we don't want to be designing last year's cloud product. We want to be designing next year's cloud product, and we want you to help us by feeding us that input as we go. So just a little bit more detail on each of those 3 services so you understand you can put them into context a little bit of what each one is responsible for. So Cloud Assembly, as we said, it's that foundational provisioning layer. So you go in there, you set up your cloud accounts, be it your AWS, your Azure account, or your vCenter, and you set up what we like to call the cloud abstraction layer, right? Things like zones and profiles that help us understand how to translate that blueprint intent into exactly what we need to provision in each given cloud. Then you set up your projects. If you know VRealize Automation, these are similar to your business groups. Right? It allows you to say, here's a team that's working on a particular thing. I'm going to give them access to a subset of the infrastructure, potentially, a subset of the content, things that they're actually allowed to provision. So it allows you to do some high-level policy management there. Once you have that set up, you can either import your existing workloads that are already in the cloud or in your vCenter and bring them under management, or you can start to design your blueprints. Designing your blueprints, you can start either from one of the patterns that we have available in the marketplace as sort of a pattern or a best practice to start working from, or you can just start from a blank canvas and design exactly what you want. And We do have versioning now. That's been a common request from VRealize Automation over many years. So we have in-product versioning that we can manage natively in our service, and we'll also be able to integrate with Git or other source controls, so you can actually manage everything centrally using your own collaboration tools. And then finally, if you know VRealize Automation, you'll know what that blueprinting and testing use case looks like, or what that flow is like. You end up building a blueprint, and you save it, you publish it, you have to entitle it, and then finally you can go and provision it and see if it did what you wanted. Now we actually have the ability to deploy straight from the blueprint canvas and see the results. And then not only that, but once you've seen what that blueprint provisioned, and you realize you have to make updates to your blueprint, you can go and make those edits, and then you can apply that updated blueprint to your existing deployment. So you don't have to tear down your old deployment and start from scratch. You can simply apply the difference in your edits to the previous blueprint, and that is all with the goal of speeding up that authoring and iteration process until you actually get to the part where you have a service that you actually like to expose broadly to your end users.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
A question that is asked pretty often is, for AWS and for Azure, for example, I understand we can connect to the cloud and then automate deployment, but for vSphere, that is maybe it's on premises. Do we have to open ports to our data center? And that's not the case. What you have to do is to deploy a virtual appliance in your own data center, and the virtual appliance will connect back to the cloud automation services. So the only thing is required there is internet access for that virtual appliance.
Outbound access.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, very good point, thank you. Yeah. So moving on to the Service Broker. So as I said, Service Broker is that self-service consumption experience. It's that storefront that you're going to present to your end users. And so here, the content sources that we're showing up front, the Cloud Assembly Blueprints is just one of those types of content. So you can also bring in native AWS CloudFormation templates, or Azure Resource Manager, or Helm charts, right? We can bring in different types of templates that you want to actually provision or enable your users to provision, and bring them under that same consistent catalog experience. Then you can entitle anything from that pool of content to your projects, the same projects we just talked about in the previous slide. So you can, again, control who has access to which catalog items, what they're able to provision. And as I mentioned before, you can also add on additional policies. So things like approvals, things like leases, things like budgets, things like naming policies and other integrations. And all of that then feeds into what that self-service experience looks like for your end user. So they can come, they can browse your catalog for the services that you've made available, and then they can go ahead and manage their provisioned resources on an ongoing basis throughout the lifecycle. The CodeStream, as I mentioned, is our CI/CD pipeline. So it's all about getting features from a developer's laptop into production. Right? So it starts with the developer has some feature, some code to check in. When they do that commit, it kicks off the pipeline, and this is just the process that you define yourself. What are the stages? What are the steps within each stage? What are the conditions that would allow you to promote code from one stage to the next? Under the covers, it may be calling Cloud Assembly or the Service Broker to actually provision the infrastructure to actually go ahead and deploy that application, but then it can also be calling out to other systems to run tests, and you can specify the different gating conditions. For example, if all these tests in this stage pass, now you can go ahead and promote to the next stage. So we have integrations with many of the tools that DevOps teams are already using commonly. So it's not something where you have to go to a team and say, here, we've got this whole new solution. You just throw away everything you've done and use this wonderful new tool instead, which is all integrated with the VMware stack. This actually plays very well with the tools that your teams may already be using, so that they can actually just use this tool to tie everything together and kind of orchestrate the overall process. And in the end, you get a dashboard that shows you analytics about how well your pipelines are running. So things like, of your recent pipelines, how many of them passed, how many of them failed? If they failed, at what stage did they fail? How long did these runs take overall? So it gives you, these key metrics that allow you to then look at your process and find places where you need to optimize, right? Or if you notice that your pipeline durations are increasing over time, is there something that that you need to do to optimize that so you can kind of keep your teams moving forward? So, as I said, we didn't want to build the cloud solution of the past. We wanted to build the cloud solution of the future. So I've been working with a customer, one of our design partners in the United States, and they had had a lot of experience with VRealize Automation. They had a very successful private cloud solution. Then they did a customer satisfaction survey internally. And they got a lot of comments like this one. I just picked this one out of a list, but they're all very similarly themed. Basically, people are saying, well, this is very interesting, but it doesn't feel like a cloud to me. It feels kind of like just self-service VMs. Where's my API? Where are my advanced services? Right? And increasingly, you're seeing that developers, when they hear cloud, they're thinking AWS, right? They're thinking Azure. There's a new kind of standard for what they want out of an automation platform. So customers like that came to us and said, look, we're doing very well with your solution. We have thousands of users. We have tens of thousands of machines, and actually lifetime, we're looking at 5 or 6 digits of machines that we've managed through your product. But still, our competition is Amazon, right? You need to help us compete with the likes of the public cloud. So those were the things that were driving the development of our new generation of automation. So as I've said a few times, and hopefully you're starting to believe me, we thought multi-cloud first, and in fact, it's multi-cloud with a public cloud-like consumption model, right? So again, cloud nowadays means AWS-like, it means Google Cloud-like, right? It doesn't mean SDDC with some self-service aspect on top, which is traditionally what we've done with VRA. Is we gave you that self-service layer, and then we said, oh, well, let's also give you self-service on Amazon. Let's give you self-service infrastructure on Azure. That's not really what the cloud or the value of the cloud is. So we wanted to enable the true cloud experience. And as I mentioned, we're engaged with many cloud teams who said, how do you help me get to the next step? How do you help me get all of these teams who are starting to go to the public cloud? How do you help me get them back under my solution? Or how do you help me provide a solution which feels to them like it's actually addressing all of their needs? So that programmatic access, the APIs, CLIs, and infrastructure as code, that became very important, very central to our new platform, because we realized it's not just about a catalog experience where you log into a portal and you have a nice UI and nice forms to fill out. It's all about how do you actually access this programmatically, because if you're trying to reach the application teams, right, the fewer tools that they have to actually touch themselves, the better. Right? They want to actually just be able to call the APIs and have everything triggered automatically. Extensibility is still very important, because we don't want it to just be like, okay, I got self-service VMs. We want to actually be able to call out to other systems that you need to integrate with throughout the whole lifecycle of the product. So that's also very central to our new cloud automation service. And finally, we took a new approach to governance. So VRealize Automation started off as very much of a IT-centric tool. So we're saying here, wouldn't it be great if you can allow your consumers to have a self-service experience rather than just opening up tickets, right? But don't worry, we'll let you keep control, right? And we'll give you all these policies and gates that you can set. So that over time turned out to be both a lot of overhead to manage, right? And it also was introducing friction for the consumers, right? So what we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure the governance is there, but we wanted to make it as unobtrusive, as invisible as possible to the consumer, so that, again, you can go to them and say, here's the service that we provide, and if you go this way, we like to reference the Netflix analogy of the paved road, right? And that paved road philosophy is you say, look, we want to enable you to do whatever you want. You can build your own tools, you can use your own process, whatever works for you, but here are the services that we provide. These are the common themes that we see that our teams need. If you take one of our services that we make available, this will be the smoothest possible path for you, right? It will be already certified. Security will not have to come and harass you about following the policies. We take care of all of that. We can help you manage it. We know how to support it, and so forth. So that combined with governance that doesn't get in the way of the end user is what we think helps the customer actually, or your eventual end customer, want to embrace the solution.
Yes. So, some of the benefits, Helen talked already about them, but let's have a quick look at these as well. One major benefit, of course, is no more managing of the VRealize Automation stack because the cloud automation services are provided as a service. This also means it is very easy to start with. Just register and go ahead and try the solution and pay as you grow. So that's also nice. This is very powerful. Cloud automation services provides true multi-cloud management. AWS, Azure, vSphere are all treated as equal citizens, and you have a construct called the cloud agnostic blueprint. You can create a blueprint that can be deployed to Azure, to AWS, or to vSphere. Doesn't matter. So that's pretty powerful. And infrastructure as code has a more prominent role in the interface. You can see the code of the blueprints that you're creating, and also includes a versioning system. That's also very nice. So, enough talking. Who wants to see a little demo? Let's do that? Okay. Let's go move on to the demo.
All right, so first of all, we said getting started should be easy, right? So, and it certainly is. So if you go to cloud.vmware.com, and you can find Cloud Assembly, for example, under the list of services, and then just click the Start button and plug in your email, and we can sign you up for a free trial so you can actually get your hands on the product and evaluate it for yourself to see whether it is meeting your requirements. Then once you actually get into the product, you'll see something like this. So these are the three services that we've been talking about so far, but as you can see, they run side by side alongside VMware Cloud on AWS, VMware Cloud PKS, Hybrid Cloud Extension, and our sister services from the Cloud Management Business Unit. So these are all the opportunities we have for, again, tying these things closer together so that actually the more services you consume, the more that they actually work with each other, and the more benefit you get out of them collectively. So let me just dive into Cloud Assembly, and we'll just be able to give you a short taste of what the services can really do. So I encourage you, if you like what you see or you're curious to learn more, to go ahead and visit our hands-on labs, because we do have a lab for these services that you can actually go and try out yourself, and it will be able to walk you through much more than I'll be able to show in this session.
From a functional perspective, you see some similarities between cloud automation services and VRealize Automation, but it is a brand new solution.
Right.
So.
Yep. So first thing that you'll see, so going into your very brand new organization, setting up the service for the first time, you'll see a little bit of an orientation diagram. It shows you some of the ideas that we've mentioned so far. The idea that you can design your blueprint, you can tell us what your requirements are. They will map down to different aspects of your infrastructure, and then eventually, when you deploy them, there'll be managed deployments in the cloud with the characteristics that you defined up front. So how do we actually make all that happen? So if we could continue, you'll see this panel opens up here on the right. It actually guides you through all the initial setup steps so that you're able to actually get things going. So these are the cloud types that we support today. So as you can see, AWS and Azure very cleverly have their cloud names early in the alphabet, so they show up first. But then we also have VMware Cloud on AWS, vSphere, and NSX, both T and V. So just to demonstrate how we are actually multi-cloud and we're not just vSphere anymore, I'll actually go and set up an AWS account. So all you need to do here is provide your AWS credentials. So please don't.
No pictures of the key,
yeah.
please.
No memorizing. Yeah, no memorizing our secret key here. So I'll just plug that in and validate. And you'll see that we're asking which regions do you want to actually use for provisioning, because public clouds have dozens of regions. You may actually want to actually use them all for automation. So it'll give us the choice to say, actually, in this case, I want to use US West 1, US West 2. And here it prompts me, do I want to create a cloud zone for selected regions? And it's selected that by default, so that seems like a good idea. I guess I'll keep that. So it's gone ahead and created my AWS account, and now we're going out and doing an inventory of that of everything in that cloud account. So I go over here to my handy guide, and it's walked me through this this process, and it says next I want to go and look at cloud zones. Okay. So I have these 2 cloud zones it created for me, one per for each region that we selected. So if I go to US West 1, you can see that I can select some things. I can select some placement policies. So this allows me to define whether I want, for example, to consolidate my workloads or spread them out. And you can imagine, especially if this is a private cloud zone, that you might want to consolidate into fewer clusters, potentially for licensing reasons, or you might want to balance things out across your clusters for performance reasons. In this case, I'll just leave the default. And you can also specify capability tags. So this allows you to do very powerful dynamic placement policies. So for example, I'll say that for US West 1, I want to use this as my prod environment. Oops. It auto-completed to something else that I didn't want. There we go. So I'll use this region for my prod environment, and what that means is that in my prod environment, I'll be able to provision to the availability zones in this particular region. And then for USS 2, I'll use that to be my dev environment. Right, because US West 2 is actually a little cheaper than US West 1. So for all of the kind of high churn environments or temporary test workloads, I'll use that one instead. So okay, I've set up my cloud zones, I've configured them, and all right, next step is create a project. All right, so I'll go in here and create a project. And so as I said, project helps you define a team of people who are going to work together, and you're going to allocate them access to different infrastructure. So I'll add.
And again, the project construct is a bit the same as business group in VRealize Automation.
Okay, so I'll add myself as administrator and add a couple of members. So these are the people who are going to be working within this project, and they're going to have access to the infrastructure that I define. So here I'm going to add the US West 1 zone and the US West 2 zone that we've been working with. And I can provide a priority. In fact, actually, let me use I'll go ahead and make this one priority 1 and this one priority 2. And so by default, if I don't specify anything, we're going to go to my, my dev region. Otherwise, we can go to the prod region. Okay, so that one looks okay. Now it's asking me to provision a flavor mapping. So we mentioned before that you're creating these abstractions so that you can actually build your blueprint in an agnostic way and just express what your requirements are, and then we can translate that to actually what we're going to do in the cloud. So these mappings are one example of that. So I can say I have a small flavor. I'm trying to define just simple names that I can use to talk about just basic t-shirt sizes, right? And in Amazon, I might say that when I provision a small machine, I want that to be a T2 micro. And maybe in my dev environment, actually, I want it to be an even smaller machine, right? Because I don't think I need as many resources for dev workloads. Then similarly for images, right? I'll specify, for example, I want to generically be able to provision Ubuntu machines, right? And I have a particular image that I want to use, but I could also just search. I can search for Ubuntu for sure, and that will still give me thousands of options, right? So if I actually want to search for a more specific image that I already know, then I'll be able to select that. And again, in my other region, so I would need to map my regions independently because you have different AMIs available in each region, right?
I think we have a slide about this as well.
Yeah, we do actually. So
maybe go back to the presentation.
Yeah.
This example Helen just showed that is working with Amazon in different regions, but you can also use the flavor and image mapping to create an abstraction layer on top of AWS and vSphere. So if you look at the flavor mapping here, we have defined in this example on the slide a flavor nano. For AWS that will be T2.nano, but for vSphere it will just be one vCPU and 512 megabytes of memory. Same counts for the image mapping. The image mapping, for example, you want to deploy Ubuntu. For AWS, there's an AMI available for Ubuntu. For vSphere, it's just a vSphere template called, in this case, template Ubuntu. And by creating this abstraction layer, you can use the same blueprint to deploy to both AWS or vSphere. It doesn't matter. For example, you can also say, well, test will deploy that to AWS, and production will be deployed to vSphere. So the exact same blueprint, same virtual machine and application definition can be used across different clouds. So that's a pretty powerful feature, I think. Go back to your demo. There we go.
Great, okay. So now we at least have some basic configuration. We can actually start to create a blueprint. There's actually many more details that I could possibly define, but just in the interest of time, I wanted to move ahead to blueprints so that you can see what that looks like. So I'll create a blueprint, and as I mentioned, part of defining your projects is who actually has access to which blueprints. So I'm going to create this blueprint in my project that I've just started. And now you have, actually I will get rid of this just to give ourselves a little bit more room. And let's zoom in so you can read a little bit better. So as you can see, we have, if you know the VRA 7 blueprint designer, this probably looks somewhat familiar, at least the part here over on the left. You have some objects that are available to you to add to your blueprint. We have cloud agnostic types, but we also have cloud specific types. So cloud agnostic allows you to use these abstractions that we're defining to build your blueprint, and then we're able to deploy that to any of the clouds that you've helped us define. If you want, for example, to deploy something and you know that this workload is always going to be going on vSphere and you want to use vSphere-specific settings, things like thin provisioning, things like customization specs, right? Very vSphere-centric configurations, you're able to select the cloud-specific machine and enter all those parameters. Same thing with AWS. You can do AWS-specific, and as you can see, we also have services in AWS beyond just the basic infrastructure services, unlike in VRealize Automation. In Azure, again, we have the cloud-specific infrastructure. We're actually also working on the cloud native services for Azure as well, so expect this being SaaS for those to show up very shortly. We'll have a selection of commonly used Azure services as well. We'll have NSX-specific networking objects and also ability to tie into configuration management like Puppet and Ansible. But for now, let me show the cloud agnostic capability. So as I drag one of these objects onto here, you can see that my right panel here is getting populated. So all it shows me here is this is the most basic definition in the machine. So all I really need to do is give you an image and give you a size. Those are the things I just defined. And that's all I need to actually be able to provision something. So I want an Ubuntu, right? And I would like that to be small. OK. And now I'd like to deploy that straight from my blueprint now that I've defined it. So and all I have to do is give you a name, and it goes off and does it. So the definition is very simple, and then we can already see it start to provision and start to go through its process. All right, so
and this is of course, a very simple example, but you can add more different virtual machines, networking components, and also more cloud-native services to the canvas.
Right.
Yeah. And link those services to your virtual machines or whatever is required.
Yeah. So as you can see, in this example, we went to US West 2. Why did that happen? Because US West 2 was the zone that I put as higher priority. So I didn't ask for anything other than give me a small Ubuntu, and the highest priority target available in my project was US West, and that's what we did. Now, if I want to do something different, I'll tell you that I actually want this to be a production machine, right? And as you can see, when I type here, things are actually showing up to represent it visually on that visual canvas. So you can see that we're actually taking that and we're representing it in both ways. So everything that I drag onto the canvas shows up in the infrastructure as code pane. Everything I type in the infrastructure as code pane is reflected in the canvas. Actually, I shouldn't have clicked save. So
it's a lot of saving.
Yeah, it is. OK, here we go. It was there. It actually had saved. It just hadn't refreshed the UI. So let me go ahead and deploy this one too. And see what happens. So my first one went to US West 2. Now my second one, let's see what actually happens to it. So, but even before it's done provisioning, I can already see what our placement decision was. Oops, I should have been able to.
And we're now, again, just showing a virtual machine that is deployed.
Yep.
You can link Puppet and do some application installation, but also Cloud Init or Cloud Config, maybe you know it, is also supported. So with Cloud Config, you can include for example, a bash script or Cloud Config script in the blueprint, and then some application component will be installed automatically. So that's also pretty powerful.
Yeah. So we can actually see the logic that we used to actually to decide where it's going to go. And you can see this one actually ended up in US West 1 because I asked for something to be provisioned to my prod environment. So it will summarize for me what I actually requested. I asked for a small Ubuntu machine and for it to go to my prod environment. I'm in this new project that I just created where I have these two zones available, and we chose this zone. And why did we choose it? Because it understands what to do with small and Ubuntu, and also it has that prod tag that I had defined earlier. So the reason why it didn't go to my US West 2, despite it having higher priority, is US West 2 was the dev environment rather than my prod environment. So I'm showing an example of choosing between Amazon and another region in Amazon, but you can actually do this across clouds. So I could have one zone that's on my vCenter and one zone that's in the public cloud, and actually we'll be able to choose based on the requirements and based on the constraints that you provide. So Viktor mentioned, these are very simple use cases that we're doing so far, but you may want to do something a little bit more interesting. And I mentioned before, we have a marketplace that actually includes a few examples of some common patterns that we see, and we're going to be publishing more over time. So if, for example, I go and open up one of these, I'll be able to get some summary information about it. I'm able to go ahead and import it into my environment after, of course, accepting the license, so I can add it to my project, my demo environment that I've been doing. And then opening it up, I can see this is a much more interesting example. It's got slightly more interesting topology. It has much more detailed YAML. It's actually defining certain input parameters that we're going to prompt for at request time, and some of these input parameters will actually influence the outcome of what we're actually deploying. So, for example, the deployment page of this one is going to look very different from the one that we did before, where we said, hey, everything is hard-coded, so you have to think about nothing. Now I've actually decided that I want to expose some of the parameters and some of the options to the requester so that they can actually customize that deployment, right? So I have this defaulting to go to the dev environment. I'll be able to choose whether I want to go to a small or a medium. Of course, I don't have medium defined in my demo yet, but this is an example that kind of shows you how you could do that, right? And then as I provide as I provide values, if I go above what I'm allowed, or below what I'm allowed, it's actually going to warn me that I'm going beyond the parameters defined in the blueprint. So I'll be able to go ahead and deploy this as well, and it will go through that same provisioning and policy engine that we had before. So there's much more I could show you. I could show you the versioning and how we can go through various iterations of the same blueprint, but and I think my demo environment is probably doesn't have enough configuration to actually deploy this whole blueprint. So again, this is just a example that I could show you to use as a starting point. Of course, we expect that you'll have to adapt it to be able to actually use it in your environment. But
almost running out of time.
Yeah, we're almost running out of time, so we wanted to make sure that we had time for a few questions. If you have anything, or we'll be able to stay a few minutes afterwards. If you have time, you don't have another session to go to, please let us know. Yeah.
In the back.
Sorry, there's a microphone so we can hear you better.
How will this integrate with an existing VVD deployment, and is it available on VVD?
Is it available on VVD? So VVD is more about how do you deploy our on-premise products, right? It's more of a recommended architecture for that. Since this is a SaaS service and we're actually deploying and managing the whole service, we don't need to provide that level of guidance. But we will be able to provide you, best practices for how to integrate, for example, with your on-prem SDDC.
So there's no issue with integrating with an existing deployment then, yeah? Like we could stop using on-premise VRA and start using this with our existing deployment?
Yeah, exactly. This could basically take the place of your existing VRA, right? But manage that same on-premise SDDC.
Yeah, but of course it depends a bit on the scenario, because there are some differences in functionality. So you have to do some research on that. Is VRealize Automation the solution, or is the on-premises, the as a service solution the way to go?
Yeah.
So for future projects, I'm a VMware partner. Where does this leave VRA?
Sorry?
In terms of positioning, I'm a partner, a VMware partner.
Yeah.
Where does this leave VRA? You know, if I have like future projects where I'm positioning new solutions, for example, right now I know that I'm positioning, for example, NSXT instead of NSXV. I'm already doing that. With this, should I start positioning, you know, cloud assembly, or is VRA still going to be a relevant technology that you are still going to be doing, you know, more development on? You know.
Yeah, I think actually NSXT versus NSXV is a very relevant comparison, because NSXT has actually existed for a while, right? And it started off with a very focused set of use cases, and it's you, okay. So it started off with a very focused set of use cases, and it did not really have parity with NSXV, right? So you were probably evaluating customers on a case-by-case basis of whether or not T was the right path for them going forward, or V, right, where you had a well-known set of solutions. So I think it's very much the same with VRealize Automation today and these new cloud services, right? These are brand new, just launched, right? And they're still in initial availability. So for now, it'll have to be very, very specific to the customer, whether the use cases that are covered by our SaaS services are the right thing for them, and whether they're better fit, for example, for the more multi-cloud, more developer-focused use cases versus what you know well with VRA today. So over time, the functionality or the types of use cases that they'll be able to cover will start to converge. So then we'll actually start to move more customers onto this new platform. The other aspect, the other obvious one is the SaaS versus on-prem, of course, right? So in some situations, SaaS is really attractive. In some cases, it's not an option. So the good news for those for whom it's not an option is that the code that we're basically releasing in a SaaS first kind of model, we will eventually take all of that, we'll actually package that up, and that will become VRA 8, essentially. So everything that we're showing you here and that you'll be able to work with as a SaaS product and you'll be able to try out in the hands-on labs, you'll see that actually be the evolution of the on-prem product as well. So eventually, it'll be literally the exact same thing. It's just a matter of form factor. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, 2 quick questions, if it's all right. Firstly, where does VCD sit on your roadmap for as a provider to deploy stuff to?
So for VCD as a target that we would be able to provision to, it's something that we're actually been talking to the VCD team about adding that as another option. So it's not available today, but it's work in progress.
Okay, so you haven't really started it yet. It's just we'd like to do that at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. And also Azure Stack as well is another one that would be useful to see in that list. And then the second question was, how do you secure, for your SaaS version, how do you secure the connection between your platform and the VI endpoint or potential other cloud endpoints? I presume the AWS one is just SSL over the internet, but what about customers that don't want to do that over internet? Are there any options for that?
So where they have absolutely no outbound internet access
No, maybe they want to do it over an MPLS or something, some kind of dedicated circuit, or they have specific encryption requirements. Is there anything planned for that, or would that be a VRA on-prem solution?
Yeah, for now, I think if they really have a very restrictive architecture, then it might be where VRA is a better fit for it right now. Yeah. But as part of the overall SaaS solution, that proxy appliance that we talked about is also evolving. So as we get more of those requirements, we'll probably add support for more different architectures as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Hello. Do you plan to add other cloud providers such as OVH or IBM, and if so, is there any roadmap yet?
So we definitely do intend to support more cloud providers. In fact, actually, our goal is to provide that as an extension point. So actually, we can collaborate with partners to build support for their particular platform and expose it as one of the clouds that we can support. So it would essentially turn into an SDK where you could build the plugin for any given cloud. We don't want us as the core automation team to be the bottleneck for onboarding new clouds. So that's part of our overall strategy, is to be able to expand that so that we're not responsible for being the ones to actually have to implement those. So you may not be waiting on our backlog. We'll be able to work with those partners if there's enough demand. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. Yeah.